Hello and welcome to At the 55, your home for U Sports football. Me and Tom are back on the mics, bringing you our Tier C of our preseason preview pods. Tier C, aka the Something to Prove tier, as we highlight on the Tier D pod. The relative level of what teams have to or have not to prove is the theme carrying throughout, and we have a healthy middle class of teams vying for playoffs that are going into this tier. We're going to talk about those four clubs. We're going to talk about some feedback we got following our first pod, specifically related to OUA TV, and so much more. But first, Tom, how the heck you doing, my friend?
I'm doing great, my man. The more that we do this, the closer it means we're getting to the start of OUA and U Sports football season, the more excited that I get. Every time you and I start these, right before we actually do the pods, giant smiles on our faces. Hey, man, what's going on? We're another week closer. Let's go.
I know it's an amazing thing to think about. And thank you all so much for not just the feedback we're going to get into, the listens, the watches on YouTube. It already off to a great start. Sometimes it ramps up, and certainly it'll continue to ramp up as we get into the heart of the OUA season. But the feedback coming from last week seemed to be predominantly one in the YouTube comments, one in an email that was sent directly to us that was a very nice email. Thank you to that individual, but both of which were ultimately disgruntled or worried about the coverage coming our way OUA football wise in the fall. One just sort of generally saying they share our concerns in terms of the OUA TV model. We also have some data from a poll list on social media that I'll let you reveal momentarily. That's relatively staggering, and with enough responses to make it, it's not small sample size theater here that we're performing. And then the email kind of generally speaking about coverage and alluding to the social media side of things, or pardon me, the OUA TV broadcasting side of things. And as it happens, we didn't even report the full story of what the OUA TV remodeling is. So we got all that sorted out. Not fully what we're getting, but sort of the model that they're going with. So Tom, let me pass it off to you. We alluded to the fact that OUA TV is going with a slightly new payment model, and it's more than just, well, there's a lot more elements to it than we spoke on last week. So what does this new structure look like?
So first and foremost, one of the big things that we really said was, if you're going to be charging a lot more money for this, your quality and your expectations has to also go up, because this is similar in pricing to the Canada West. Upon deep diving this a little bit more, what I found out, and especially after going through this and going to select and pay and everything, maybe it's something that's after the payment wall, whatever. But here it says for the all access pass for OUA TV, watch all regular season and post games live and on demand, football, basketball, or hockey. To me, and especially because once you go to pay and purchase this, it doesn't ask you which sport do you want. This means that all three of those are going to be a part of this package, which for some people, for true OUA fans across, that's something to be very excited about for sure. But where we are now starting to get a little nervous is that if you're spreading this cost amongst three different sports, that means that I don't think you're putting all of your eggs into one basket, or you're really going to commit to the overall real big improvement for streaming as a whole, because that, I think, is $40 or $60, like a similar price scheme for the Canada West, is just for one sport. But once again, that comes with unbelievable coverage, phenomenal commentators, so on and so forth. So that gives us a little bit of pause and a little bit more apprehension about this whole thing.
It's definitely frustrating, and ultimately I'm still gonna at least say to myself to see how things develop a little bit more before I fully go off the rails, because I certainly, it's not going to take much pushing to get me to the point where I'm really getting upset on the air here. The other thing that's interesting about that, is it just came to mind, is that, like, by them offering football, basketball, and hockey, that's ultimately 5 seasons, because it's, for basketball and hockey, you have the men's and the women's side of things. And so again, to Tom's point, is like, I'm in full agreement that the concern now, because as we were saying last week, and the feedback, and I'll let you set up the poll that we posted in just a second, is that willing to pay for an improved product. And it seems like or at least the fear, the concern with what you just read off there, Tom, is that they might be saying we're going to charge more, but we're going to give you more of other things. And frankly, I think that doesn't like I maybe if you have a couple kids playing some different sports in the OUA, I mean, we're doing the best we can to grow this one singular sport, and we're doing a lot, and some other people in the space are too as well. And it's still a relatively small market. The way they're going about it makes it seem like, oh, but we're going to give you all this extra stuff and all this. It's like, I don't, no, 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 we don't want that. And when I say we, don't think I'm just speaking for you and me, Tom. I think a lot of people, and let us know, comments, again, emails, social media, whatever you got to do. If you're in agreement, we want better coverage of the sport we care about. I'm sure the people who are diehards for basketball and hockey want the same thing. They don't all of a sudden want to say, well, I don't care about a Yates Cup. I wanted to see better coverage of, New Brunswick versus, Nipissing or whatever. I think those are good hockey schools, whatever. It doesn't really matter. Again, I don't care about those sports, and no offense, but nor should they care about our sport. And maybe I'll tune into some basketball since I'm paying for it anyways, but that feels like a really disingenuous way of running a model of me being like, well, I guess I'll watch this thing since I got to get my money's worth. That's not a great way of running it. Hopefully it doesn't end there. Hopefully it's an improved product that comes with it. But Tom, we put it out there on social media, an Instagram poll that I think, Ned, again, I'll let you run through the views, over 500 votes coming in. So, not nothing to say the least. But what were the results? What were the questions we posed, and what were some of the results that we got from that?
So it was just a straight up question. Are you going to pay to stream games this year? That was what we asked. We gave 4 different options. Yes, not a chance, only if the product improves, and then a why should I? Overwhelmingly of that over 500, 66% said not a chance. Over 330 votes said not a chance, I'm not paying for this. 59 or 12% said yes, that they would pay for this. Although there are certain people where, once again, we got reached out to for this, where it's not just, yes, we got an email, yes, we got some comments, but we've got a lot of engagement on social media, people reaching out and saying, yes, I'm going to have to because my son plays in a different province than what I live. So I'm forced to buy this because I want to watch my son and I want to watch him play. And so that's why some people are saying yes. There's 15% have said only if the product improves, and they're looking and hoping that, just like we are, at the end of the day, we are commenting on this and saying, this seems really sketchy, but of course you and I want this to be good. We want it to be exploding. This is the best way to market our athletes, at least in the space that we have right now. But you start wondering about, okay, is this, if you're saying that only if the product improves, presumably you're going to wait and try to watch and see about what's happening here. And then you start looking over, and what you and I are so hyped about, and rightfully so, is week 1, Mac at York, Western at Queens, Laurier at Guelph, amongst a couple of other games as well. And even before all of this happened, a very prominent former Queens player who's not Nate Hobbs reached out to us and said, why the hell are you doing Western Queens before students get on campus? That makes no sense. And once again, this is not, the timing is one thing. That's what the universities can control. The university, Queens, is not saying, hey, let's play Western week 1. So when you start thinking about all of this and you really start traveling down the path of, is this being nefarious? Is there a double reason why week 1 is so alluring to make you want? Because yeah, absolutely, you could just pay the $9.99 for just the one game, but there's 3 that are really must watch.
Yeah. No, 100%. Yeah. So, I mean, ultimately, just to say it again, because I think it's an important point to make, for that, the 78 votes, roughly, which exceeded the number of people who just straight up said yes. The people who said yes, but only if it's an improved product, are in this weird situation of whether they have to wait a week and say, okay, if the feedback from what's being posted on social media seems to say, dude, you have to get it. You have like the camera angles, they got sideline reporters, instant replays. It's so good. Well, then shoot, by the time you're tuning in for week 2, you got some great games. But exactly like you said, and exactly like our legendary quarterback from Queens, who's not Nate Hobbs, also wasn't Tommy Dennison, is saying that you're missing a matchup like Western Queens that's already not having the fans in the stands, all these types of things. So it is worrisome. I did think, though, when you were referencing, and I think this is an important point in thinking about the families of our players that are out of province and how much more inaccessible it makes it for them, just to those families out there. And we've met a number of you because a lot of those families do come in for a few games, especially come playoff times. And it's great meeting you all. And we appreciate the kind words of how, we let you stay in touch with the league and everything. We're not going anywhere. So make sure you stay tuned for the nice price of $0 to stay abreast to everything happening in OUA football. But again, a lot of people sharing these concerns, the what we're getting on social media. Like I still remember vividly sitting in the facility attached to Richardson Stadium, being in Queens about 5 years ago with Dakota. We're interviewing some of the players at Queens at the time, and I think it was Rashid Tucker, former star running back there, just talking about even at the time when OUA TV was a completely free product, of being like, I think the question that was posed was like, if you could make one change to the OUA, what would it be? And he wasn't alone in saying this amongst players who we interviewed at the time and conversations we've had with players since. But it's a barrier to entry. The model alone felt like a barrier to entry for players and their families when it was completely free. So now you're adding on a financial barrier as well without promising anything improved other than this sort of backhanded, but we're giving you all these other sports to watch. They do not care, and nor do we. Again, we'll be paying that fee because that's what we do. Mm-hmm. And we'll let you know. And if it goes sideways, trust me, we will let you know. You won't have to tune into the podcast to hear us yelling and complaining about it. But let's move on to brighter things, because we have an exciting podcast to cover today. Tier C, something to prove. As we set up last week, the largest single tier that we're doing, and as I think you had sort of pointed out when we were kind of working through the tiers, it really is evident of just how healthy the OUA is right now, that we have these 4 clubs. And just to reiterate, we did 3 last week of Waterloo, Mac, and U of T. You add on these 4, that means that's 7 covered. That leaves 4 in Tier B and Tier A. However those shake out, you know which teams they are. Again, leave it to you all to sort of play around, decide how you think we're going to slot those 4 teams in. But that means that of these 4 teams, and I'll say the names, I mean, you see them in the podcast style nonetheless, of Windsor, York, Ottawa, and Carleton, one of these 4 teams we're talking about is good enough to make the playoffs, but will not be making the playoffs this year. And that is a beautiful place to be. Tom, something to prove. Windsor, York, Ottawa, Carleton. In some regards, it feels random when you just hear those names, and we'll, go over where we had those teams last year. But what is sort of, when you hear those 4 teams, because obviously we put this list together, we know the method to the madness. We had those conversations. I'm really proud of how we came up with this and what we landed on. What does that mean? What does something to prove, Tier C, mean when we think about these 4 clubs? We'll go through them one by one in grand detail, but it's sort of the snapshot. What are we really talking about today?
More than anything, these 4 clubs represent, you've got something here. And for some of these guys, you've had something for a little while now, and you have yet to get to your potential, or you've been close to the cusp. I mean, a couple of years ago, Windsor's fighting against Laurier, and if not for a supposed controversial call, that's not actually controversial, it was the right call. But if not for that one call, potentially Windsor is going up and playing against Western in that 23 Yates Cup. But since then, you look down, and we'll dive into all of these individually, but York, with the amount of buzz that's around them and all of the new recruits that are in there, Windsor with losing so many guys and having a bunch of stuff happen and just kind of be on the cusp. And then you're looking at the 2 Ottawa clubs that seem to love hovering around 4-4, if not lower than that. And it's like, yeah, you've got pieces here. We can each individually, well, the 2 of us here, because we're OUA football nuts first and foremost, we can pick off, holy crap, look at these guys, look at this guy. I mean, that's how we made up the top 55 list that we did. But all of these four teams have potential, and they have had for a little while now. But hey, man, you got to prove it now. You got something to prove going into this season.
That's it. That was beautifully said when you brought up that semifinal from 2 years ago between Windsor and Laurie. I can feel Murray Drinkwalder just whatever, however he's listening to this right now, and he still is right now, being like, I swear if you guys say that was the wrong call again. So thank you, Tom. I still think it was the wrong call. But point aside, 100%. And again, it's when you look at how everything shook out last year, you had Windsor finishing at 5-3, fourth in the conference. You had Ottawa at 4-4. Ending up in sixth place in the conference. Carleton at 2-6, York at 2-6. York, of course, that final game against Mac, a win away from making the playoffs. And Windsor, again, we'll go over them all in great detail. We'll go through the losses. A Windsor team who, just like had that great game against Guelph, those great matchups against Queens, two teams, which again, if you just do the math, we do have ahead of them right now, but it's really going to come down to the who is not there. But let's start with the new kid on the block, the York Lions, the York Fighting Lions, no longer the litmus test Lions, as they used to call them. But a team that has crawled out of the basement dweller tier status of the OUA, going from in such quick order, a tier labeled winning isn't everything to something to prove. And that comes in a few reasons. Number one, as we just said, you were a very winnable game in the end of the season from making the playoffs last year. And that would have been huge. And I don't think anyone was mad at them for not being able to get the job done. Those 2 wins alone were such an incredible undertaking by Coach Dexter Janke, his staff, and those new players in there. More than anything else, though, obviously, Coach Knox's defense, the guys that we saw really excel in that defense last year, I think we're really excited going in, being like, just right from the jump, being able to say, oh man, I can't wait to see what so-and-so does. I can't wait to see what this guy does, knowing now that we have expectations. And of course, the Keegan Hall of it all. Yeah. When you have a quarterback like that, you just can't be, you have something to prove when you have one of the best in the business. Tom, obviously, we're going to talk about Keegan. We're going to talk about what this offense can do. And, of course, having Tommy Dennis in there, as from what we've been hearing, seems to be the case, and how explosive that's going to be. But I want to start first and foremost, though, because we're not the only people, and maybe you can remind me where we put them, where we kind of projected in that way too early predictions. But there's a lot of excitement for this year, and this year alone. I wonder, though, there's part of me, though, and this will probably be a conversation that continues through the season as we talk about York more specifically, of how sustainable, whatever jump they make from 2-6 ahead this year. Maybe they make the playoffs, what have you. As far as the continuing building of this team, I'm curious, like, how sustainable whatever success they might get this year is. Because on the one hand, Keegan Hall, it seems to be like a gun for hire. I don't think he would have much more than the 1 year just based on the number of years he played for at Mac. And there's also the piece on all of the CGFL, West Shore Rebel, Okanagan Sun guys that Dexter has been bringing in. And it's in large part due to those guys that this team has had a lot of success. And of course, adding in one of the great defensive coordinators in Coach Knox. There is part of me, though, for a club in the York Lions that historically, as a Toronto guy, knowing guys from the Toronto area that went for a year and for whatever reason left after a year. And again, we're talking about another administration, both from the athletic department to the specific people calling the shots for the football program. I get that. But culturally, though, when the success you have this year may be reliant on a lot of guys coming in that are completely new faces, there's part of me that wonders what that messaging is as far as, it's a cutthroat sport. We get that. I get that. I wonder, though, how sustainable that is of just always bringing in from, Dexter bringing his guys in and everything like that. And maybe you're, what's the word I'm looking? Ostracizing, kind of pushing aside maybe guys that have been in that program for a few years. And just, these are things sometimes, these subtle messaging things that aren't intentionally done towards players that have been part of a team. Like when an incoming rookie gets like the red carpet rolled out and then the vets are in the locker room being like, screw this kid. He hasn't even stepped foot in a training camp. He hasn't even done a dang thing. And we're treating him like he's the savior. Like genuinely, that's how you can piss off a team. Can we just talk briefly about the culture of this team? I think they can be really good this year. We'll go over what our way too early predictions are, but I'm a bit curious of long term what this might look like.
It's a very interesting case study, and it's certainly going to be one of the many reasons why we're so excited about this season is to watch and to see what this York Lions team is really going to be like. I think final count was something like 70 players, 70 recruits coming in this year, whether that's from CJFL, whether that's transfers like Keegan Hall or new recruits that are coming in here. And what we've heard from people who are left that program or trying to leave that program is something along the lines of, well, I don't know who my teammates are, or I have, difficulties telling with what the culture is like, or whatever the case. And you want to make sure that you're taking that not at face value because they're leaving this program. And if they're leaving that program, they're going to have a lot of negative things to say. And there's going to be, if there's two sides to a coin, it'll be on the negative side of it for sure. But there is truth in that space. And there is something to be at least acknowledged. Now, from all that we've know from talking with other people and talking with other players, Dexter Janke is phenomenal at culture. It seemed like last year when he came in, a lot of the players and parents of the players, when we were in the stands, mentioned what he's doing here, how he's holding kids accountable. Really seems like he's doing things the right way. When my experience with Coach Knox as a defensive coordinator, when he was at McMaster, he was phenomenal at that. We still have defensive players who absolutely love what he did there. Head coaching is another story that we won't get into. But once again, you have certain people in certain places here that could make this a lot of fun. But having 60 or 70 new faces coming on here, and some people with, once again, in that CJFL kind of format, you obviously needed to have grades in order to get into this. But if you're only getting into it so that you can get, your name on an East-West or your name with the CFL draft and potentially get into a combine situation so that you can leave, what kind of a setup or what kind of a legacy are you leaving for that program here? And is now the expectation for Coach Knox, Coach Janke, and the rest of that coaching staff just, if we don't recruit 50, 60, or 70 guys year after year, we may not be able to sustain this. And I don't think that in itself is very sustainable.
Yeah, I think you using the term case study is exactly appropriate. And to that point, we really won't be able to tell how it all plays out until we get there. So I wanted to sort of bring that up from the start as something that I'm curious to watch. So we didn't get down the year so I can either say, look, I was totally wrong. And again, I'm right there with you from having met Coach Janke, and he just seems like a genuine, nice person. And obviously his football acumen speaks for itself. I don't think he's just someone who's going to just kick people to the wayside if they don't have value, all those types of things. But just so we can, if something does go amiss, we'd be like, we kind of thought that was a bit of an interesting way of looking at it. Let's talk about Keegan. Let's talk about this offense and specifically what they might be able to muster up in an offense run by Tommy Dennison. And of course, Coach Dennison in his OUA, aside from being one of the great quarterbacks in OUA history in the 2000s with the Queens Golden Gales, most recently having incredible success, relatively speaking, but with that explosive offense that U of T had with Clay Sequeira going back to the late 2010s, and with some of those weapons they had around them. And Clay was an outstanding quarterback in this league, an MVP caliber type dude, an all-Canadian caliber type dude. And we're talking about that exact same guy in the mix here. Remind me who he's bringing with him, Keegan, that is from Mac, the receiver. Which one was it? Nicholas Adair, big body receiver type. You add into the mix guys like Avery Ford, big body receiver at 6'4", 195. The CJ Vincent guy who was on the roster last year, again, CJFL, West Shore Rebel, import, whatever, but who was also on the radar for CFL Combine type stuff. Cairo Berry, a guy that we were high early on. And of course, our dude, Navante McCoy, who's kind of an everything Swiss Army knife. Sometimes I think he is more of a running back or whatever. And then you add a guy like Melkus as well. Like, so many weapons around them. And if there's one thing that from experience that Tommy wants to do is just say, yeah, we might not hit you on a 40 plus chunk play every single time, but we're going to get you eventually, and we don't need too many of those for those explosive plays to really net positive in the grand scheme of things. Kind of a la, almost I feel like Sean McVay kind of took that approach in his early years with the Rams of being like, hey, one of these is going to hit, and you don't need many of these to hit for it to all of a sudden make things get out of hand. With what we know Keegan can do, not just with his arms, but extending plays, because, as we talked about those three teams last week in Tier D, offensive line play is always going to be number one, and I don't take this to be an O-line at York. I mean, there's a couple names in here we definitely like, but nonetheless, it's not a team that first and foremost we think great line play necessarily, or especially on the O-line, but with one of the best quarterbacks in the nation, some incredible weapons, and one of the most just gunsling ready coordinators or play callers, whatever he is, in Coach Dennison. This is the light show, like York Lions. That is like, I think what the expectation should be for what they're going to do offensively.
Yeah, I think that there's a lot of potential that's here. I mean, obviously, towards the latter end of that season last year, when we actually saw our guy in Sean Law get his chance at quarterback, we saw what could happen with a prominent deep threat that's there. And you see a guy like an Avante McCoy, and you say, hey, man, just go run, and I'll get that ball to you. And then you have a guy who's tried, tested, and true, like Keegan, who can throw that deep ball, but can also do the mid-range stuff, can do the short game stuff, can read defenses really well. I think that's really where the potential of this is going to start to come out and really start to play here. However, I am under the impression here that one of the big things I would have to assume that if Keegan's going into this, he has the capabilities to do everything that he did. Obviously, he's been doing it for the last couple of years at Mac in terms of throwing the ball, averaging like 40 or 50 attempts in the air is certainly something that he has done. I wouldn't be surprised if he's going there being like, I want something of a commitment to the run game. I want to make sure that I'm not just sitting back there and potentially getting sacked. I mean, let's not forget here, in that last game against York in the regular season game, he was sacked 4 times, along with a bunch of other stuff. And that's not even to say anything poorly about the McMaster offensive line. That's just purely a numbers game. If you're going back there and throwing the ball 40 or 50 times a game, you're giving 40 or 50 chances in order to get hit or get sacked or whatever the case. And this isn't something that Keegan has told me or anything along those lines. I'm purely speculating here, but I have to assume he's going to go up to them and be like, hey, we've got Nelka Salunga, who is a phenomenal running back who I don't think has really been given a chance as of yet. Let's get him into a system where we can actually start giving him the ball, taking some pressure off of me. And then, hey, here's a play action pass with guys coming up because you respect the run. Avante McCoy one-on-one, I'm taking that all day.
Definitely. I love that you brought up, just to go back to a few things you said there, I love you brought up Sean Law, and like we are still, it's at the 55-year home for U Sport Football and the unofficial Sean Law fan club. And I think though, like even if us being honest, like few people throw a better deep ball to him, he didn't always have the best ball coming down to his next reads and having those touch passes. We know Keegan's going to have that. And as far as the run piece of it, again, that's going to be interesting to see. I wonder though whether like that very well might be where the attitude he's going in with, and they might be in agreement. It might still be yes, but let's get teams on their heels first. And then let's get even just some simple draw plays where we're getting teams in a light box, and then we can just hand that ball off, some zone action. Like you can even like get them. Like I'm expecting probably times where they go straight empty if they feel like they have it, but single back for sure. And just with Keegan's athleticism, his know-how, the number of reps he's had against a lot of these defenses and a lot of these coordinators, of being able to say, let him do a read option look and then say, okay, great. You're essentially taking another defensive box player. You're accounting for that guy as well, and just letting your big guys focus on double teams, pressing to the line, tiring those guys out. And I am in agreement. I'll be curious to see which way it flows on the line side of things. Like we know that they have pumped out some incredible defensive linemen over the years. Most recently in Triple J, Janvier Messier, or Double J. What am I saying? Triple J. I'm thinking of Jaren Jackson Jr., a little NBA talk. We'll say that for our other podcast once we start covering OUA basketball, I guess. But in Brandon Davies Lyons, who was a guy who was at the combine this year, I don't believe he's attached to a CFL team, and I can't remember which way he's he's swung more as far as D-line going to O-line, O-line going to D-line, 6'6", 290. It's typical with those guys. You see them when they're getting opportunities to go CFL that they're being asked to play more O-line. I think there's a chance he could be back, and I think that they should very much, with the $1 million arm of Keegan Hall behind him, be having him play O-line first and foremost. And then you add in next to him a couple veterans on that O-line and Xavier Carrera, as well as Evan Enisu. And those are three guys that if those guys are there, those are veteran, really strong offensive linemen that once you can utilize this, like the same way that we're saying that I'm kind of responding and saying, use your pass threat to make your run game that much easier for you. Lighter boxes, not having Sams creeping around, and we're going to talk about one of the better Sams in the league when we start talking about their defense and how just frustrating they can be for run games and offensive lines, generally speaking, and just let those big dogs go to work. So I'm extremely excited from that standpoint. Tom, certainly there's other things we can talk about with this offense, but I frankly feel like we did a pretty good job. Would you want to talk about this Greg Knox defense and our guys in Brody Clark and Peyton Ryder holding it down the middle that make this defense, same way we talked about with even U of T having a couple of good interior linebackers and Ilya Linney to be able to sort of hold down that defense and give you confidence. This defense, you're very intimate with Greg Knox's defense, as am I, having had to deal with them, a couple of those matchups that you and I had. What do you make of this defense year two under Coach Knox? Familiarity with the system. Similarly, we've talked about with Coach McNeil, K-Mac, and how getting that time for to be able to dive deeper into the playbook. What do you think this year? How do you think this year looks different from what we saw last year with his defense and the players are slotting at the various positions?
I think another year under a Coach Knox defense makes everybody on that defense who returns a little bit more dangerous. That means that Coach Knox can start opening up the playbook a little bit more. Here's some blitz packages. Here's the real stuff that used to give you and I nightmares. You, when you were prepping, me in practice every day against these guys and understanding, hey, why is that Sam linebacker playing here? What's that safety doing? Wait, hey, what the defensive end just dropped back into the coverage and I get two guys or blitz. There's a lot of things that can happen there. And I think we just saw the tip of the iceberg last year with York. And I think he's really going to start expanding that with two guys in Brody Clark and Peyton Ryder who are confirmed to come back next year as well. This is really where you can start expanding out. I mean, when you start thinking about the outstanding defense and the specific Greg Knox defense, one of the names that comes first and foremost is Nick Shorthill. He played Sam from year one all the way into his fourth or fifth year and was dominant in that position. And you can see even his own growth. You could see what was happening with that Sam linebacker position on that defense, how much more he was asked to blitz, how much more he was asked to cover in certain scenarios and really be the focal point at Sam. I think you're going to start seeing that even more so from Brody Clark. I mean, the dude finished with 61 total tackles. That's pretty good for year one, but I think you're going to start to see that slowly start to mature even more so. Peyton Ryder with that monster in the middle and just having his nose stuck in any gap to make sure that he's stopping the run. I mean, Brody finishes with 61. Peyton finishes with 55 and a half. Love the fives, my man. But these are two guys who are tackling machines and will continue on that space. What I'm really interested in, and once again, like we said, I mean, we're two offensive linemen. There's a reason why we talk about the O&D line. It's because it is such, you win games O&D line. For as good as those guys are, if they don't have dudes in front of them that can eat up double teams or demand on an offensive lineman one-on-one, they're not going to be as effective, or they might have those tackles, but those tackles are being made at 5, 6, 7, 8 yards back rather than 2 or 3 yards in front of them. So this is really where those questions start to come up. But once again, like I said, Coach Knox having some more time to work with these guys, having people try to understand the mad scientist that his defensive mind is. And when you get a guy who can understand that and you can really, really start having almost a secondary coach on the field, that's where the madness really starts to happen. And that's where offensive linemen like you and I start sweating bullets.
Yeah, I mean, and we obviously already talked a bit about Brandon Davies Lions, whether he's back to begin with. Still believe he should be on the offensive line for them, but obviously that's a body they know that they can use on the defensive line. just to highlight two other guys, again, sort of secondary guys to add in with our discussion, Raekwon Lewis-Gibbs, Kirill Niari are guys that showed some promise last year and exciting to see how they grow. And I think, though, if this offense, not to make it all about offense again, but if the offense can be as good as we think it can be, not just does that then have, trickle down effects onto an offensive line that maybe you have question marks about, or a run game you might have question marks about, but you might not grant other teams, other opponents, the opportunity that, even if they're staring at you being like, oh my God, we could pick up 4 or 5 a carry, no doubt, against this defense. I'm not saying that's going to be the case, but let's just say that is where perhaps that defense is weaker. If you know that your offense is putting up points and possibly doing so rapidly, that changes the whole tenor of how other teams have to prepare for your defense, and then how that allows someone like Knox to be able to get even deeper in his bag, where he knows, guys, look, these guys are going to pass, these guys are, whatever it might be, and just be able to see how that plays out for them. Tom, really, especially also given that we have 4 teams we're going through, I'm happy to move into our best case, worst case scenario. Obviously, hey, we got to throw a shout out to our guy in Nathan Walker for no other reason. Well, A, because he's one of the solid kickers in the league, and also we know mom and dad are listening right now. Shout out to the Walkers. But anything else that you want to talk about, or should we dive into best case, worst case?
No, I think this squad has a whole lot. Once again, there's a reason why we have them aptly named in this spot here, but you're bringing in a whole lot of people. You're doing this in a different way than most of the OUA is doing as well. You got something to prove here big time.
Beautiful. So let's look at the schedule, as we all know very well, because Tom, you and I will be very much in the house for possibly doing a game day live. We haven't sorted that one out or not, so don't hold us to it. I probably shouldn't have said anything at all. But starting off at home against the McMaster Marauders on August 23rd. The following week, they travel to Ottawa to take on the GGs. Then they return home for the Battle of Toronto on September 6th. Being hosted at York. September 20th, they take on the Carleton Ravens from York. They go on the road on September 27th to take on Queens. October starts with them on the road against the Waterloo Warriors on the 4th. They then take on Western on October 10th and finish up their season on the road in the Royal City against a little team known as the Guelph Griffins. Tom, best case, worst case scenario, where are you seeing it shake out for this team?
Honestly, for me, the absolute best case, and once again, stars align, everything else, I'm saying 5-3 for this team. I think that beating McMaster, Toronto, and Waterloo, and then getting 2 against the teams from Ottawa, who are also sharing this list, I think that's really where I see in their best case scenario here. I don't know enough. Once again, 60 or 70 new recruits coming in here. We don't know who's really going to be a standout from that. But as it stands right now, I don't see the Queens, Western, Guelph as that. So I see a 5-3 season for these guys in a worst case scenario. I'd go 2-6 on a worst case. And once again, we love a good rivalry. I'm not, that red blue bowl really could go either way in this, depending on what happens here. But I think 5-3 or 2-6 is where I got these guys.
I think I'm right there with you, exactly as we said it. We'll definitely give them the nod on the teams that we ranked on a tier below them. And then you're looking at the 2 teams that are alongside them in their tiers and saying, hey, look, in the best case scenario, can you take out Ottawa, especially early in the year if they're trying to figure some stuff out? You have to do that travel, but I'll definitely give it to them. A Carleton team middle of the season, and we'll see how they're faring. We'll talk about both those teams in a moment to come. Yeah, I think you have it spot on, 5-3 down to the 2-6. And, really anything in between those 3 and 5, you're pushing it. But most situations, if we're setting that as a ceiling and a floor, most outcomes are seeing this as a team that should be thinking. And however Coach Janke goes about talking about these things with his players, not my part to comment on one way or the other. But a lot of people do set goals that sound like, for this year, we want to win X number of games. We want to rush for X number of yards. Our defense this, and we want to make playoffs. Some teams do set that out from the jump. That is our goal. We are making playoffs. That is the expectation. And if we don't succeed in that, we have failed in that endeavor. And I think that, again, I'm not going to tell him how to do his thing, but you could very well see, and I wouldn't argue with him or any head coach, given the way this team is shaping up this year, to say that is our goal. We were right on the doorstep last year, and we have markedly got better because we've gotten one of the best players at the most important positions in the whole nation. So, frankly, that should be what they're thinking, and that's why they have something to prove this year. And what just how incredible would that be to be able to see the York Lions in the playoffs for I I since I don't know when, since
Yeah.
golly, that's a tough one there. Our Ken Waller, I'm sure will have the answer for us. Let's move on to our next team, and let's just move up from the rankings of how these teams fared in the playoffs or in the regular season last year, and move on to the Carleton Ravens, also finishing up at 2-6 last year. Now, Tom, when we talk Carleton Raven football, I think we have to start with the news that came to light in the last couple of days about their best player. And let me hand it over to you because you brought it to my attention.
Yeah, somebody who you would have seen, you would have had to wait a little while to see him on the top 55 list this year, but who is not coming back is one Kasim Ferdinand. Having him missing from that offense now completely, in my mind, changes the dynamic of what's going to happen here. I mean, you've got phenomenal receivers and Tristan Reddy, Frederick Hatchie, and a list of other guys, but when you have Kasim, he demands a double team, demands it. And when that happens, you have your choice. You want to leave Frederick Hatchie one-on-one, you want to leave Tristan Reddy one-on-one, because they're going to oftentimes win that battle. Now that he's not there, you can play a little bit more zone, or maybe you want to favor Tristan Reddy a little bit more and say, this guy's not going to beat us, we're going to lock this guy down. That makes passing a little bit more difficult, especially when you've got DBs now who can play a little bit more zone and can play a little bit easier.
That is certainly, like we just talked about with York, how their passing attack writ large can have that influence on everything else that they're doing. And this is why, Kasim Ferdinand, though we certainly had some feelings about it in the past, but certainly why he's a deserved two-time All-Canadian, because he has that singular impact on what the rest of the team can do. And we know this is a team that's certainly going to want to be throwing the ball a lot. That's their bread and butter. That's Corey Grant, what he really brings philosophically, and what they've seen even going back to before Elijah Barnes seemingly took over the reins at quarterback. And certainly that's where I want the conversation to go to next, but not going to be easy. We saw the ascension of Tristan Brown, and I think now, and got to meet him at the regional combine. Great dude, big dude. We saw him do it all year long. This is a huge moment for him to step up into. I know he can do it, but that'll be fascinating now, seeing what this team looks like without Kasim, and what Kasim does for them too in some of those gadget plays. I still remember 2 years ago where he, I think, threw a touchdown pass against Western in an early season game in Carleton, where just the defense is just seeing, 27's got the ball, we got to fire down hard, and then he's throwing one up to Hatchie or Brown or whoever it was. So that's a huge impact to be able to have. And as you mentioned, the impact goes beyond just who's getting doubled covered, where coverage is going, but also the pressure you can put on a quarterback. And we got now a young quarterback. I believe he's technically in his third year. Elijah, that is, redshirt freshman, his first year, and last year taking the reins after Tristan Lefebvre getting hurt in that opening game against the Guelph Griffins. And like I said it last year, and I'll say it again, where I don't know if I've been impressed more by a first year starting quarterback than what Elijah did last year. Like, just looking at some of the numbers, he ends up third in completions, third in attempt, with a 63% passing percentage, and that ends up being sixth ranked in the conference. But I'll take, and frankly, it's 63.9, so I'm just going to say 65, and I will certainly, or 64, I'll certainly take 64% completion percentage out of ostensibly a rookie quarterback, let alone someone who's throwing it that many times. I like that, and certainly that's to get better in having more experience, and ends up in third in yards, third in touchdowns. You see the things like the interceptions that are a little bit high, but you expect those from a young quarterback. And oftentimes, the thing that kept this team from winning a few of those games, I think about that game against Mac, in specific, that beautiful shootout between him and Keegan Hall, where specifically late in the game, he didn't always love the decisions he made. And I think it was either talking with just you and I, or with our good friend from the Carleton broadcasting standpoint, whose name I'm admittedly forgetting, Tristan Ford. Thank you so much, Tristan Ford. Shout out to you and the lovely job you do out there. In that, sometimes it might not have been the best plays that you're saying, okay, you were asking a first time starting quarterback to make a couple tough reads in there. But I love that they put him, I put him in that pressure cooker. Pressure makes diamonds, whatever metaphor you want to use. And I only see that improving his lot in this year. So, Tom, where do you see Elijah improving this year, or maybe stepping back, because there's sometimes you have that that sophomore slump, if you will, paired with losing Kasim. That could be a big blow for them as well, while also recognizing that last year we did see, for the first time in a while, a bit of a run game start to get going with guys like Matthew Morin and Joey Marcotte and Keyshawn Reed, Ethan Roca as well, on top of the fact that a guy like Barnes is effective using his feet as well. What do you kind of see this offense holistically being the year two with Elijah, but now without Kasim?
I think we were always going to see this, but I think even more so, this is going to showcase the development that Elijah is going to have from year 2 to year 3. And I think having this year under his belt and having all of the experiences that he has had, being in tight games, playing in the Panda Bowl and being the guy there, and then having that very tight game against McMaster, like you mentioned, where that ball just sails just a little bit to get that game-ending interception very late here. I think we're going to see him make smarter decisions and really utilize more and more. And let's not forget, this is the Carleton Ravens squad that's coming in with 2 new coordinators, and his new offensive coordinator in Nathaniel Griffith, former York Lion, obviously with a whole ton of experience in this coaching space as well, getting into this and having that, okay, let's see what we had last year. Let's have this open competition. Let's really make sure that this is our guy. And now there's a lot of benefits from a new coordinator coming in. There can be some negatives or so, but we're having somebody here who's going to be a new face and really allow for some new areas to come in. I mean, Nathaniel Griffith is a guy who coached at York for sure. He was on that World Junior team for Canada in 2024 as well as a coach. He's coached at a varying different levels across. We saw him at Team Ontario as well. Great to chop it up with him. So I'm really interested to see where he comes at it from an offensive coordinator standpoint, because obviously the plays that get called would depend heavily here. But I think no matter what, I think this is really going to be a very big year for Elijah Barnes. I think this is where he comes and steps out and says, in that first year when he's there's a number of times where you can say, you know what, I don't really know what this read is, or maybe if it's the wrong read, but I'm going to throw up a ball to Kasim Ferdinand, and 9 times out of 10, he's going to come down with it anyways. So that can bail me out. Now with this, in the commitment to the game and commitment to getting better, like I know he has, and also in this new coordinator, I think he's going to spend even more time in the film room, even more time focusing on his craft, and I really think that he's going to step up into something great this year.
I think they have all the right cooks in the kitchen to be able to put something together beautifully. And being able to work, a guy in Coach Shake, as you mentioned, has worked with young quarterbacks as well, both in his time at York and as he mentioned with the T-Mo thing. He may have even worked with Elijah, because I think Elijah might have been a former T-Mo guy. So that's a really interesting piece that I'm trying to remember if we had sort of connected those dots before. So hey, look, we knew that there was the opportunity, the possibility of them losing Kasim, and what a career he's had with Carleton. What a great football family that is. We still get to watch Denny, and we'll be talking about him and his and my GG's momentarily. But I think there's all the excitement of the world, and even just looking at last year again, just briefly, we mentioned the tight MAC game, and this is, but it goes so much deeper than that, and I think why we were so frustrated. And to look at last year quickly, we had Carleton, as well as Ottawa and Guelph as well in a tier C, also in a tier C, but that was called step up or step off, meaning that like you were in this position where we liked the players that you had, you'd shown some success, and it was like, okay, now is the year where you're either going to show that you're ready to take a step further and compete for maybe a home playoff game, which Guelph clearly was able to pull off, or just, being able to give a good first round playoff matchup like Ottawa did against those Guelph Griffins, or Carleton, you stepped off a little bit and you did just didn't really wow us. And in reality, 50-50 Club may have been more so where they belong because they gave Guelph a great opening game in a
Mhm.
game in which Tristan Lefebvre goes down. But you put up 25 points against that really strong Griffin defense. They lose week 2 to Windsor. Obviously, Windsor making the Windsor to Ottawa travel is not easy, but a Brady Litster game-winning field goal at the 55. Shout out to you, Brady, the pride of St. Thomas, Ontario. That Western game starts off the rails with those 14 points Western gets off of a couple just bad special teams plays off the jump. It's 14-0 within the first like 2 minutes, but you still end up scoring 21 points on that Western defense. The Mac game, but then as well, obviously a Panda game that was a 3-point score, and it's indicative of both. Well, it's at least we can say indicative perhaps of where you are having a first year player making a lot of high leverage decisions. There were times, especially a la that Panda game, where he was not being put in good decisions, or there were not good decisions being made around him. And that was frustrating, to say the least, to watch even as outside observers. But you can look at what they did last year, and we'll talk about the defense because, shoot, I mean, I said pretty just like without blinking, they're losing their best player and then talking about Kasim, but they might have been losing their best player and it wasn't Kasim. It was a guy in Ife Onyeka on the other side of the ball. But we'll get to the defense in a second. Whichever way you say it, they were in so many of those games last year. We were beyond frustrated that they were, falling into a couple of those situations where they weren't coming up with the plays or the calls when they needed to. But I think offensively, there's a lot of reason to be hopeful and to see the growth, especially as we said, if that running game on the offense is starting to balance out that passing attack as well. Now, Tom, you mentioned 2 new coordinators. You mentioned Coach Griffiths. Obviously, that leaves the defensive coordinator position, and let's use that as the transition to start talking about this defense as well. Who's going to be calling it up for them and coordinating it up for them there?
Ronald Hilaire is the new defensive coordinator. He's the former head coach for the McGill Redbirds, also a guy who was on that 2024 World Junior team for Canada. Really, this is something that I'm really excited for this Ravens squad in general, because once again, we talk about how incredibly competitive it can be, in that Ottawa and Quebec region for recruiting. When you've got a guy like Coach Hilaire, who was the head coach at McGill, who knows all about what it's like to recruit in that Quebec region, has relationships with schools, has that level there, that's really enticing to me first and foremost, along with him obviously being a great defensive coordinator as well. I think that's what's going to help out this team in the long run here for sure. However, looking at this year, you still have a lot of really good pieces here. You're losing big names like Ottman Braum is not coming back, but with a guy like Chris Toupin, there's a reason why we had him on our top 55. I think he is going to be a really outstanding player for these guys. He's going to be a star linebacker for them for sure, but lot of missing pieces here. Even, you laugh and joke about it, whatever, but Michael Lightbody not back with this squad up on the line. Like, he was your best run defender, period. You required 2 or 3 guys in order to move that guy, and not to mention an electric interception that first game against Guelph, that tip drill that he comes down with, and you'll love to see a big man get one. But there's a lot of pieces on this defense that requires a lot of work, and you're going to have young guys who are ready to step up. And I'm very curious to see what happens with this Carleton Raven defense.
Yeah. No, first of all, I never joke about Michael Lightbody. That man is no joke. Hey, look, love me some Michael Lightbody, Ottman Braum, yeah, and of course Ife. Those are big losses across the board. I think. And Chris Toupin, I love that you brought him up. He's like one of my favorite defensive players in the league right now. There's some great defensive secondary players, Jake Henderson, Schneider Cave Phillip, who both were ball hawking all year long, making big plays for them. Xavier Malone's been a consistent for them. And it's not that when I look across the board and I'm seeing names like Brody Burke, who might be back, and some of those other guys, that I don't think there isn't a possibility for a good defense and all this. I think, and it kind of goes hand in hand with the fact that it's a new defensive coordinator. I don't know what their identity is. When you have like a force multiplier type, like an Onyeka, or you can say, hey, look, if nothing else, we are going to be a league leader in sacks. Mm-hmm. Because on the back of this one guy, and that can be our identity, and that can then lead to why guys like Jake Henderson and Cave Phillip are getting as many interceptions as they're getting, because quarterbacks don't have the time to step back. And when you have consistent linebacker play like Chris Dupin and some of those guys in the middle who can just sound tacklers and clean up anything getting by, if anything gets by a guy like Michael Lightbody, then you know you can hold teams reasonably well. I just feel like I can't really, sometimes even with teams you might not have seen it, but you have enough familiarity and a sense of who's calling things to be able to say like, okay, well, if I were that guy, here's how I would do it. And maybe that just speaks to me being an offensive guy first and foremost. So I can't look at these names and say, here's how you got to do it, and here's what the best outcome would be with them. But I do like some of the talent here. But man, in Braum and Onyeka, those are two major names to be losing on that side of things. Tom, should we take that as our opportunity to look into the schedule and take a peek at best case, worst case now?
I think that's a great time to look at that. There's just so much in the air that we don't know about these Carleton Ravens yet. We're going to have to see what they can do week one.
Beautiful. Well, speaking of week one, nope, still staring at a York schedule. Speaking of week one, Carleton is starting off at home against the U of T Blues on August 23rd. Then their September schedule goes road game at Waterloo on September 6th, home game against Western September 13th, on the road against York on the 20th, at home against Guelph on September 27th, and October starts off with a Panda game that we will be doing a game day live from, which I am still just over the moon excited for that we are going to be doing that. But yes, Panda game October 5th. They travel to Laurier on October 10th and finish off the season at Ron Joyce Stadium, taking on no longer your McMaster Marauders. I'm just saying that officially. You did this to yourself, my friend, with your performance on the podcast last week. I don't know what to tell you. Your words speak volumes because they're literally your words. You guys, how dare you guys, McMaster?
Okay, we're not even talking about Mac here. Would you get out of here, man? My goodness.
Best case, worst case, Tom. What are we looking at?
For this squad, I think it's going to be very similar. I'm picking a 5-3 for best case scenario here. I think they get the dub against Toronto and against Waterloo. I wouldn't be surprised to see a win against obviously McMaster and see something against Ottawa. And I think one of the games that you and I were talking about really early on about a really interesting matchup would be York and Carleton here. I'm really interested to see what could the potential be out of this one. I wouldn't be surprised if a Carleton team that's finally playing to what their potential looks like is able to steal one away, especially against a team like York that might have so many different moving pieces in that. So I wouldn't be surprised if that happens. So I'm going to say 5-3 for this squad. On the worst case scenario, I would love to say worst case is going to be 3-5, but with how we've seen, I think 2-6 is worst case scenario for these guys. Although if they go 2-6 again this year, I think you and I are both going to put our heads through a table or something.
Yeah, no, so I'm right there with you, and like exact same reason. And I'll just stick with that 2-6 because to me the 5-3 is just best in your best games like. You're hosting Western and Guelph. That's great. I don't see you beating those games. I don't see you going to Laurier. Like totally right. Everything else, and that York game smack dab in the middle of the season. That's going to be an important game, a game that we reflect back on at the end of the season that held a lot of importance. And you're so bang on because it's easy enough just to say, look, I'm going to take the teams that we have in tiers ahead of them to win. And I'm going to say that they can beat the teams that are below them. But just from what they've proven so far, I don't think it's off the table to say that like one of those three teams in U of T, Waterloo, and Mac might get you. And you brought it up as the possibility for Mac's best case scenario when we talked about them in Tier D of that Week 9 game against Carleton. That might be the game that, Week 9 always has major playoff implications. And just what we should probably track this to see which team we project as the biggest gap in best and worst case scenario. Because so far, I think they're the clubhouse leader, and I think that's probably how it should be. When I think about this Carleton Ravens team, that their upside is pretty darn good, and a feisty team that maybe is vying for that fourth seed. Probably can't see them cracking into the top 3 and getting a home playoff game, the top maybe vying for that fifth seed. Yeah, sorry, vying for fifth, maybe not cracking that top four. And with a home playoff game, but not making the playoffs is also very much on the table. And that's what is defining this tier across the realm, across the board, which is one of these four teams ain't making the playoffs. I mean, I guess it could work out that all four of them make the playoffs and one of Queens, Western, Guelph, Laurier don't make it as well. That's obviously, there's a reality in which we're living in that, Doctor Strange, however many trillion of opportunities. I'm on board with that. Tom, any final thoughts about Carleton before we move on to our remaining two teams in this tier?
There's one team I think that when we talk about amongst all of the folks, whether it's people who care about the teams, whatever else, there's one team that consistently year after year after year makes fans want to pull their hair out, and it's these Carleton Ravens, because you look at what they have on paper, especially last year. All of the guys you have on paper, guys who are healthy, and the emergence of who's going to be a young and potentially at one point could be a face of the league type. That's how much we think about Elijah Barnes, and you have been championing him for a long time now. This team could be so good, but there's still so much that they haven't reached in their potential. It's been like 8 or 9 years or 5 or 6 years, something like that. It's been since before COVID that you actually won the Panda game. Like, there's so much that's going on this. So I'm really just hoping that Carleton finally starts to play to their potential.
I am right there with you, even if it comes at the extent of my adopted team in my Ottawa GGs, who let's talk about next, who finished 4-4 last year, good enough to book them sixth best in the OUA, earning a trip to the Royal City to give Guelph just about all they could handle in that game. And we've talked about our experience at that game. And I think it's instructive to start there, because it's the last time we saw them on the field, of how many folks that we knew from the Guelph area who were really taken back by how good Ottawa was playing. Seeing a guy in Josh Jansen, who, of course, to people who don't follow the league, and guys, why are you not listening to our podcast? Why are you not watching the podcast? We'll keep you up to date. But of thinking their backup quarterback, because they're seeing Ben Miracle was the starter week 1 at York. Josh Jansen, what's the deal here? Charles Asselin, who is this guy? Like, all these types of things, this defense and whatnot, giving one of the hottest teams in the OUA, the Guelph Griffins last year, run for their money. Ottawa, as we talk about with Coach Belfay at the helm, always going to be buttoned up, always going to give you their best. You know they're going to come prepared. You know we're going to get incredible secondary play from them and defensive play in general, though, of course, one of the best defensive secondary players we've seen in some time is not returning because he is, playing professional football now. But sort of generally speaking, Tom, what are sort of your thoughts coming off of last year with this Ottawa GG team, 4-4 record, that feel right for them, what they did in Guelph despite the loss? Just generally, where's your confidence meter out with this GG club coming off of last year?
I think, honestly, I'm in a better spot now than I was back then. Let's not forget, you and I watched the Ottawa at York home opener for York, and for that entire game, we're looking around like, if York can just get one big play, they could win this game. The final score ends up being 27-4, but for the longest time, there was no touchdowns on the board. Both clubs really struggled to move the ball, and I don't know what happened with our guy in Ben Miracle. He just didn't seem to be the same guy as what he was. But later on into the season here, we saw Josh Jansen really start to get control of things and start to be that guy. And even against the game against Windsor, he splits some reps with Ben Miracle, but he comes in, he goes 16 for 19, 204 yards and a touchdown. And you're starting to see, this is the guy, this is the dude that I think could bring us to the promised land here for the Ottawa GGs. I like a lot what he's been doing, even in that quarterfinal playoff game that you and I were at with Guelph and with Ottawa. A lot of the Guelph fans looking around being like, oh, we should crush these guys. And you and I are like, do not count out these GGs, not with this guy Jansen ripping it and on that streak that he was on. Let's not forget winning that Panda Bowl and the dominant victory against U of T, riding a high, getting into Guelph. This is a good squad that I'm really excited about going into this year, because once again, we had a lot of conversations on Okay, well, how many first team reps is Jansen really getting in training camp going into last year? How much are they focusing on trying to get Ben Miracle up to where he was previously? Now he is undoubtedly the guy. He's going to be the dude. All the reps, all of the coordination, all of the chemistry between those receivers. I'd love to see where he comes out.
I'm total agreement with you. I feel like if you asked Laurier's defense over the last couple of years who the best quarterback in the OUA is, number one, they're going to give you the correct answer and say Taylor Elgersma. Number two, they're going to tell you Josh Jansen because somehow this guy just has the ability to go out against Laurier, who puts out great defenses every year, and put up 20 plus, 24, 27 on these guys fairly consistently. I think it's only in 2 games, so maybe small sample size, but he's a baller. The guy's a freaking, Sasquatch of a dude hailing from Chilliwack, BC, pull him out of whatever forest they found him there, just born to play football. But, on both sides of the ball, though, I think I'm totally with you. I think that alone, because as we've talked about with York and we talk about all these teams, if your analysis goes no further than how much trust do you have in the guy at quarterback and what's his top talent, then you know what? Like, that's a good enough conversation to have. And right there, I'm in agreement with you. I'm excited to see what he can do. And we'll go over all the guys around him on offense and what that defense is shaping up to be. But and maybe you correct me if I'm wrong on here, but just as far as some guys that just doing a little bit of work, I don't think we'll be seeing where Garnett and Gray this year. Number one is Eric Cumberbatch. We still have his brother in Patrick, and Patrick is a guy you're going to see on our top 55. And I'll be interested to see what the feedback is on that, because we think very highly of defensive backs from Ottawa with the last name, with the surname Cumberbatch. But Eric for sure is not there, nor is just Kevin Victome, a guy who was so impressed with his career as a guy who came in as a kind of true cover corner, and that they migrated over to safety with Denny Ferdinand coming in, and someone who I was very critical of whether he was a sound enough tackler to play anything but just like a cover corner, and he did a great job there. Maxime Melafont, Kerwin Geist, as far as some receivers for them, I still remember you coming back from the combine and being like, Melafont might be the fastest guy I've ever seen in football pads. Kevin Anderson on the defensive line. I think he's going to be done. Tolu Ahmed, another defensive back, and Riley Hildebrandt, another defensive lineman for them, an interior guy who I don't believe is on a CFL roster, is a guy that is kind of in that gray zone right now, that unless we see a signing post from a CFL team, unless he's posted something on his own socials about hanging him up, or until we see Ottawa's preseason or training camp roster, Hildebrandt's a bit of a question mark, and a massive question mark for them, because let's start with the offense and then go to the let's start on the defense. We always start offense first. I mean, I guess we did start offense by talking about Josh Jansen to begin with, but in Riley Hildebrandt on that defensive line, because you're losing, as we said, Kevin Anderson already. And if Hildebrandt's gone, that's a defensive line that, I do always have trust in the Ottawa region teams, if in part because I think having that better access to Quebec allows them to get some of these linemen who have been so consistent. I mean, just look at the offensive tackle, like Zach Palejos and Tristan Fortin, CFL starting tackles that the GGs have pumped out that we don't talk about enough. Carleton Ravens, same thing, having some of those O-linemen being in the CFL. But, if there's one thing we've said about this Ottawa defense over the years, it's that the pass secondary is as good as any. We'd love to see a better pass rush, though. And Anderson was a consistent dude for them, not just like a true blue pass rusher. Hildebrandt, great, just big, strong in the middle, can get after the quarterback a little bit. So those two more than any. I mean, obviously there's some secondary play there, but let's just start with the box play, because that's where I think they were weaker, and there's the possibility of them maybe taking a hit there as well.
Yeah, this is in no short order. Like, I am genuinely concerned about this Ottawa GG defense. I mean, your linebacker play going to be fantastic. Daniel Briere, Jackson Brashear, these guys are going to be phenomenal. But when we talked about it last year, Riley Hildebrandt is amazing. But like, we wanted to see more quarterback pressures, getting to the quarterback with 4. That's really the key here, and trying to really get some pressure here. But it didn't matter all that much because you had the best defensive secondary in the OUA last year. Now you don't. You've lost so many great key players in that stance, at least it's going to be a very different makeup here. And if you consistently now, once again, struggle to get home with four guys, have to start to send blitzes or just give quarterbacks way too much time, they will start picking guys off, especially when you don't have the outstanding defensive backs that you had previously here. So they have to answer the question on how are you going to consistently pressure the quarterback? Is that going to be a consistent, we're in a 40 front, but we're just sending Briere off the edge consistently here so that he can try to get home and to try to create some matchups? Or what does that look like? Because that to me is the single biggest question mark that I have for this team.
Totally with you. And again, we talked about obviously losing Eric Cumberbatch. Patrick not only is back, but he was also injured for a lot last year. This being his draft year, I'm excited to see like what arguably the best version of him can be. And year two with Denny Ferdinand in the system. So those two alone, I think, give you a lot of promise. But again, like it's in years past where we're running like 4 or 5 guys deep in this secondary. Like even a guy in like Eli Cruikshank, who was in that secondary, that was a very serviceable player for them as well. And then, yeah, I like that you mentioned Briere and Brashear. And Briere just part of this great legacy of middle linebacker play for the Ottawa Gee-Gees. That's like, I'm chills. I'm in chills just thinking about how great that lineage going back to James Peter just in recent history is. So it's going to be interesting. I mean, I do, again, there's something to be said though about like, I was kind of talking to my dad about this the other day of like just youth sport football, college football, the difference between the pros where like when you don't have, you can't necessarily structure a team around one player of like have them sign for a bunch of years. So it does matter more about the coaching infrastructure because you can have a coach or coaches in a system for a while. And we talked about Marcel Belfait as the head man there. And I love what he's done there, what he's been able to do there. But in defensive coordinator Posey Audette, who's been there for, gosh, I don't know how many years, I think like getting on to close to 10 years now with that system. And just, we talk about these great defenses there, and obviously they're able to recruit and get these guys in the building, but there's a consistency there that even predates our guy in Belfait. So, we talk about often a lot of how, the coordinator in a certain system, like you have the trust, the way we've talked about Greg Knox on this podcast, the way that we've talked about K-Mac, the way we've talked about Coach Gleason, right? I think Coach Posey Audette might be in that territory. And frankly, again, as like the voice in this space, maybe we don't do enough of trying to like really highlight that. So there is a combination of enough existing guys that are coming back in that infrastructure that I trust that I lean towards I'm expecting them to still be good, even though I can't quite see it. Right? With that Carleton defense, again, new defensive coordinator I'm not familiar with. Some names that I like in that defense, but I don't really know what's what. And that defense hasn't been, you put aside like Ife being one of the greatest pass rushers in team history and one of the best in the country. You put aside those singular individual standouts. And I say, I'm unwilling to say what they're going to be. I am willing to say this defense will be solid until I've been proven wrong on that standpoint. Shall we flip the script and go over to the offensive side of the ball?
Let's do it.
Beautiful. We talked a bit about Jansen. No doubt we'll talk about him more and talk about the targets that he's going to be looking for. We did a little bit already without Kasim in the mix, but it's been way too long since we've been able to talk about our guy in King Charles Asselin. I have to say off the jump, and I'm really saying this without thinking about it too much, but just given some of the stuff I said about him last year and maybe, how the offense might look a little different. Well, maybe they're going a little pass heavy. I think I had a little Carleton Ottawa mind meld there for a second a moment ago. But I have to say that same way I did about, in the past on some of these pods, Charles Asselin has to be an early favorite as a possible MVP candidate. If he can do like the things that we've seen him last year with a passing attack that can give him that much more space, like there were games where he was the only thing they had going for them. Like we've seen Jared Kasari and what he did as arguably the best rusher, but that Queens team, though, of course, they were doing a little quarterback roulette at times with the relative health status of Alex Vreekin, they had some other weapons there. This is an Ottawa team, and same with when Ottawa had JP Simonkinda, a guy that we truly think got robbed of an MVP his year playing for them. But I have to just put it out here right now without having thought about it too much. Certainly a name that I think we'll have to be talking about as MVP candidates going into next year or coming out of next year.
Yeah, especially with how much they relied on him last year. I mean, everything that was happening with Ben Miracle and Josh Jansen coming into the mix and just having that quarterback, not necessarily controversy, but the change-ups that were happening there. You just said, you know what, let's just give it to the King Charles here and let him rip off. I mean, he led the OUA in rushing yards. He finished with 809 rushing yards and 8 touchdowns. I mean, there's a reason why we think so highly of him. You're giggling at something. What do you got to say?
But I'm giggling because I had the York box score up again. Because like you, it stood out to me as like, man, like they really just couldn't get their stuff going. Aslan carried the ball 30 times for 192 yards and 2 touchdowns. Sorry, continue.
No,
Continue.
there's a big reason why we're so interested in his own development and what he's really going to bring to this. But what I'm really interested in is what are they going to continue doing with him in this offense? And what I mean by that, let's not forget near the end of the season, we started to see another running back in Suleiman Kamara start to get a little bit more touches there. And when we say, oh, I guess King Charles is out because Kamara's in, and then you look over, hey, who's that playing fullback? Oh, that's King Charles out in the passing game now. Hey, let's get him on a hook. Let's get him to, influence a linebacker or something. Let's get him in space. And imagine we saw how incredible he is when he's got some blocking up front. He can make guys miss and go out. Imagine just giving him a little swing pass and say, hey, instead of trying to take on a MAC linebacker one-on-one, go try to take on a halfback. Let's see how well you can do with that. Go try to take on a corner who can consistently block him. So I'm really interested to see what that evolution looks like. And for sure, I'm expecting King Charles to have that running back as his primary position. I don't think Kamara's there as of yet to take that over and to push him out, but I wouldn't be surprised in certain scenarios to start to see him at least leak out of the backfield and start really showcasing that he is a danger in the passing game as well as this.
Most definitely. Like he first got on our radar as being like, oh, this guy's a sick returner. Just seeing him in space. Like he's like kind of makes me think a little bit of how we talk about like someone like Lucas Stoikos, like kind of Avante a little bit, though Avante's clearly more receiver who gets some runs as well. I just think, even our guy in Liam Talbot a little bit, but I just think Aslan of that grouping of guys is just the better option. Now, a theme that we've talked about, and we talk about this all the time when we talk about offenses and defenses too, is just how much attention a guy can receive based on who else is all around him. And obviously we love what Jansen can do, and Jansen can make some stuff happen with his feet as well. But we've already said Maxime Melifont, pretty sure gone. Kerwin Geist, pretty sure gone. You'd have to imagine the number one target is going to have to be Noah Avery for this offense. Big dude, like 6'4", they have him listed as here. Excited to see what he can as like the true blue number one guy. And then around him, some younger dudes that we saw have some moments, looking at a guy like Robin Couillard, looking at a guy like Tristan Gilbert Thibault, another name, Romeo Lucier had some nice moments of them as well. So in the same way that both we have slightly a proof of concept of some of those younger guys, to think of a big three on offense of saying Josh Jansen's QB1, Aslan is, again, putting aside whether you want to do some fun stuff with Kamara as your running back and then having Aslan kind of in a 5R type of setup, whatever. You have him and you have Noah Avery. I think that's really good. And then being able to say guys like Suleiman, guys like Lucier, guys like Gilbert Thibault and Couillard are sort of those unknowns who then become your Frederick Hatchies and your Tristan Browns of a Carleton team where it's like you really have to focus on these couple guys. And then, oh, shoot. Yeah, these guys are all on a U Sport roster for a reason. They're now just getting more favorable matchups and opportunity to shine. So that's where I have a lot of faith that you have some of these core positions figured out already, and just see where they go from there. Tom, we still have another club to talk about. Any other thoughts you have about this Ottawa team, offense, defense, special teams, or anywhere in between?
Yeah, I think honestly, one of the best showcases of what this offense could really look like was in that Panda Bowl. I mean, Josh Jansen finishes 23 for 30, 295 yards and a touchdown. Charles Aslan, 14 attempts, 51 yards, which is obviously pretty light for him, and two touchdowns. But it's really in the passing game. The number one receiver is Romeo Lucier, four catches for 93 yards. Gilbert Thibault, four catches for 57 yards. I mean, you look the spread that's here with all of these guys. Kervin Geese didn't even play in this game. He didn't have a single catch here with Noah Avery, four catches for 37 yards and the one touchdown in the air. Obviously, when you look at that quarterfinal game, that's really where Noah Avery really comes off. Eight catches for 93 yards, kind of showcasing the capabilities that's there. But I really wouldn't be surprised to see a very similar scenario like you just mentioned there, where a guy like a Romeo Lucier steps up into a spot and becomes that solid secondary option here. Guys that you start to forget about in certain passing game, and that really ends up making you pay from that standpoint. So I like the potential that this Ottawa GG's offense has. I'm still a little hesitant on that defense, but really excited about the potential of what this team could do.
Well, let's spare no more time in taking a look at their schedule coming up to take a look at their best case and worst case for the 2025 season. Starting off in August, well, actually, golly, in about 2 weeks' time, they have a game against the Montreal Carabins. Allez les bleus, allez les bleus. That golly, would that be fun to see? Hopefully, maybe TVA has that. If I can, I definitely got to see if I can check that one out.
Mm-hmm.
Anyhow, OUA season for the Ottawa GGs kicks off on the road against Waterloo on August 23rd. Then they're home against York on August 30th. They head to Western on September 6th, head to Guelph on September 13th. They take on Laurier at home on September 20th. Then it's Panda game on October the 5th. It is they take on Windsor at home on October 11th, and they finish the season at home against the U of T Blues on October the 18th. I don't think I've really, since we probably did the way too early predictions pod, looked at their schedule. This is a very interesting schedule.
Mm-hmm.
Very interesting. Tom, let's dive into it. You're looking at this. What are we thinking best case and worst case?
Well, just right off the hop, I think that September could be a very rough month for the Ottawa GGs. But in my best case, worst case, best case, I'm picking 5-3. I think that your September starts off really strong with Waterloo. I think there's a strong possibility to beat York, especially if if they're not playing to where they could be or whatever the case. Western Guelph Laurier, that's a really tough stretch. But in your back half in October, you've already showcased that you can win Panda pretty consistently here. Ottawa Windsor might be one of the best new rivalries that started to come up for the past couple of years here. And then obviously a Toronto squad that you were able to take advantage of pretty well last year. So I'm going to say 5-3. My worst case scenario here, you start looking at it, I still think that they can beat Waterloo. I think if York plays the way that they do, I think they can get that win. Obviously, the three teams in September. In the Panda game, yeah, I think absolutely Carleton has the capabilities to do that. Windsor, if they continue to play like how they can, I'm picking 5-3 and 2-6.
Yeah, I realized as you started going, I'm like, he's gonna say 2-6, and I don't know if I disagree on the worst case scenario. I was so upset with you when you said that, was it with Waterloo, and you're like, it's like, oh, could they steal a game from one of these teams? And you're like, yeah, maybe it's Ottawa. I don't know if that's where that extra loss is going, but yeah, if you're being absolutely fair from what we're saying about York, Carleton, obviously Panda game, and we'll talk about Windsor and two shakes of a lamb's tail. I think the two games you look on here and you say you gotta win, like you have to win, are Waterloo and Toronto bookending their season. I don't know really what to make of this, Tom. I'm with you on the 2-6. Something, I don't know, call it just my Ottawa GG garnet and gray bias I'm looking at, is staring at that September and just being like, you gotta get one of those.
Man, if you steal one of those games in September, completely changes the trajectory of your season. Completely.
And all I look at it like, man, just pull out whatever stop you got to do to take out Laurier at home before the bye week, before the Panda. And I don't know if this really, I made a bet that we'll reiterate on the next pod when we talk about, or on the, when we talk about Guelph coming up, of the bet I made about Guelph and Mac. I don't know if there's a bet I'm putting on here, but let me say best case 6-2.
Wow.
I don't know. Let me just say whatever. I don't know. Screw it. Who cares? 6-2, best case 2-6. I just went from saying Carleton should have the biggest gap in them, and now in their best case and worst case, now I'm saying it's my Ottawa GGs. It's Ottawa football. It's absolutely bedlam out there. It's crazy. I don't know what they're doing, but they're producing good football players and making it darn entertaining. And again, I just can't wait for October 5th to be in the house for the Carleton Ravens. What a great weekend. Just to let folks know, you'll figure this out eventually, but we're going to be in the house in Guelph on October 4th on the Saturday for homecoming Queens at Guelph. I think it's the date in which they're doing the 10-year anniversary of the Yates Cup, the team I was a part of. So that'll be so much fun to celebrate. And then, Tom, you and I are hitting the road right after to go from the Royal City to the nation's capital, spending the evening there, and then checking out the Panda the next day. I'm so happy OUA football's back now, man. It's the bloody best. It's
best.
So good. Tom, there's one more team we got to talk about here. And they're a team that resides at the end of the 401 under the shadow of the Golden Arches. It's been a while. A little town called Windsor City, Ontario, under the guidance, the tutelage, the mentoring of one JP the Don Cercelli and his cast of coordinators and staff members around him. And one of the best staffs, I think, in the OUA. We're talking a little Windsor Lancer football right now. And to our friends, our dear friends in Windsor City, I know you're not happy right now with us having you in TRC. I know you're not. And I know you're thinking somewhere above us, you have a Guelph Griffin team that we could have easily beat last year. You have a Queens team that we did beat and that barely beat us in that playoff game that was in our house on a, one in a however many shot play at the end of it. How dare you put those two teams somewhere ahead of us? But let me start, Tom, by reading through a list of names of guys I don't think are returning. Istvan Asibo-Dotsi, I believe, still on the practice roster with the Toronto Argos, not coming back. Jackson Morkin, I think, still on the practice roster for the Ottawa Redblacks, not coming back. Devin Bloody Verisuk starts at middle linebacker for your Hamilton Tire Cats, a Hamilton Tire Cats team which week after week I keep just hating my life as an Argo fan because I love your Tie Cats this year. Kaladi Emerson, eligibility, I think, done. Giovanni Cunningham, star receiver and one of the best return men we have seen in recent years. I believe eligibility, done. Liam Hoskins, defensive end, I believe, done. Jason Rashotzi, we think, though not eligibility, but I think he might not be there this year. We don't know fully. And your adopted American son hailing from Flint, Michigan, in Joey Zorn, we don't know. A question mark. Those are a lot of names, Tom. And I was torn between starting off reading those names and starting off with the question I'm going to sort of just pile onto it of being like, who the heck is this team's quarterback? And you have those two things there. And I'll stand by what I said of this coaching staff is still perhaps, to me, one of the strongest staffs. And especially seeing Patrick Donovan's name next to defensive coordinator. You talk about that institutional stability and the trust you have in a guy just knowing how to put people in the right positions and getting the best out of guys. That's Coach Donovan. But you add in those names I read. You add in the question mark at quarterback. And to me, that's why they're in this area where, Windsor, you have something to prove here. Tom, what do you make of these Lancers going into 2025?
Yeah, I think you nailed it on the head there. But to be perfectly honest with you, even if they had a number of those guys coming back, I think I would still want to put them in this ranking because, folks, we've been singing your praises now for a couple of years to the point where other people have been reaching out to us and being like, I don't know if Windsor is all that good. I don't know if they're that team. I don't know. I don't know. And challenging us, even though we are championing the blue-collar gold swagger here, but you have yet to really reach the potential that we see from you. I think the closest iteration that we saw was that in that 2023 season when you almost came out with that victory against Laurier in that playoff game. But even in this last season, start off real strong, rattle off a solid 5 wins in a row, and then you end the season with 4 wins in a row. Lost to Guelph, that, yes, you were right in there, like you mentioned, that you could have won. Another very tight game against Laurier, 33-26, a beatdown with Western, and then a heartbreaking loss to the Queens Golden Gales to end this off. So there's a lot of question marks that are here. You show that outstanding resiliency to get those 2 key wins to start the season off, a tight game against Queens, and then that 55-yard bomb that we talked about from Brady Lidster to beat Carleton. I don't know. There's so much for this team. We are so excited because we've adopted this team. We love this team, but you haven't put it all together yet.
And part of it's as simple as like, at the end of the day, in the time that we like in this iteration of this club that we're talking about, you just Laurier and Western have just been sitting there at the top, and then you're competitive with the Queens and the Guelphs all the while. And it's tough. Tom, help me out here actually, because I have their roster up, and I'm now adding to my list of guys that I'm questionable about. And I say this both because we need to get this right for our sake on the pod, and I'm also kind of worried about the top 55 of Brenton McDougall, Robert Springer, and Ethan John. Ethan John, a guy that we were like, maybe he's coming in as the clubhouse favorite for, President's Trophy nominee out of the OUA with how good he's been at safety for them. They're all showing 5th-year eligibility from last year, Tom. We might actually have to have like a really serious conversation in a second because of our top 55 list. But my goodness, adding those 3 guys from that defense is scary to say the least. I don't know if you have feedback on that, but let's also, again, talk about the quarterback position, because that has been, Danny Skelton has shown some really great stuff at his best. He's been a guy that we have talked about as being a for sure top 5 dude, and he's maybe the guy that you're saying going back maybe 2 years ago of like, if it's Taylor and then if it's Evan and you're fighting over that third guy, there's a case for Danny. That doesn't exist anymore. I don't think he is a poor quarterback by any stretch of the imagination, but when you add into the fact that, for me, I think if you're from the Essex, the Windsor Essex region, you are hoping that your starting quarterback coming out of camp is Nick Domofsky. A, he's the local kid, and B, as the younger guy, you think maybe a little more upside, so on and so forth. Corson Roy, we saw a lot out of last year out of them, just kind of going through it. And we've said this when Nate Hobbs, one of the great quarterbacks of OUA history, was on the show with us too, that we aren't fans of rotating quarterbacks like that, from the sort of consistency, the stability, the snap count variations that can then throw everyone else off. Robert Springer, Ethan John, and Brenton McDougall scare the pants off me to think that those guys might add into some of those other guys that we're unsure of. But man, like, who's your QB1? Because like we just talked about with Ottawa, where it's like maybe they lost a couple games last year as a product of having not figured that out at the jump, but you can't make that mistake twice. And if you're Windsor, again, injuries do happen, and Domofsky's year was real with injuries, and his young career has been a bit of an injury debacle at times. You gotta have this figured out eventually.
Yeah, and I think no matter what, as long as everybody stays healthy, it's got to be Domofsky. I think he easily gave them the best chance to win consistently here. I mean, he started off in that Guelph game. You and I were watching this being like, oh my, he could win this game damn near on his own kind of thing. He was doing a lot of really great stuff, and then goes down with that injury once again. And we saw Skeldon come back in from that one, of course, and Roy, excuse me. But I have to assume Nick Domofsky, with another year under his belt, with more development, and hopefully with just a healthier season, that he is going to be the guy going into this. Just a quick aside on the additional names that you brought up. We always laugh about this with the Windsor Lancers here, where it shows they have their 2025 football roster on here, but it's a lot of the same names until you actually start deep diving in this and you say, hey, there's no Claudia Mooson on this one. There's no Devin Varasic on this one. The guys that we know are not coming back are not here. And yet you have Robert Springer on here. You have, so it seems like there could be some potential here. They might just be playing that game. The Don might be trying to screw with everybody, including us here. But I think that there's still a big capability here of having these guys back and playing here. And once again, if you have Ethan John and Robert Springer back in this lineup, only getting better and having that capability there, I think that adds in a lot. But once again, to stay back on the offensive side, Demovsky, it's got to be him as your starting quarterback.
And again, I think that's the best thing for them. I think that's what people in the area are probably hoping for. With that in mind, then, Tom, because you're absolutely right, that's probably the best way of trying to navigate through their roster. Then it's worth saying that this roster does show Liam Hoskins on it as well still. It also shows Joey Zorn, but it doesn't show Christopher John. And, it's been, I think, such a testament to Coach JP Circelli, what he's instilled as far as the just mentality of the team and what the expectations are of those individuals, but of that running back room that starts with Joey Zorn, Christopher John, Waybe Mambo, and Liam Talbot as well. 4 running backs that on their own could be starting runners, RB1s at a number of programs, but understood the thing that was best for them was to do this sort of merry-go-round of sorts, and just it probably cost some of them OUA All-Star bids. It probably cost, in the case of maybe Joey Zorn, maybe the potential for even an All-Canadian bid at times. And so to me, that speaks volumes of those guys as individuals and the coaches as well. Having Christopher John out of that mix, and we've been seeing year in, year out, this team add more guys to the CFL in their O-line, from their O-line room, and shout out to Coach Randy Beardy and what he's been able to do pumping those guys out. How do you see the loss of Christopher John affecting this team? Because obviously he's a great runner and just a bowling ball of a human being. Like, on my top 5 dudes I would never want to have to try tackling. On the other hand, there is an argument to be made of saying, look, especially if you have Zorn back and you have a healthy Waybe Mambo and all the fun things you can do with Liam Talbot, it's that weird thing where you lose a top tier running back, but maybe the running game gets better. This is so not a shot at Christopher John at all. But what do you take of how the run game is going to play out there? Because we know that whoever's at quarterback, this team still needs to be a run first club.
Yeah, I think the way that you look at it is you go, Christopher John, the player, devastating loss for this team. Having a 2 running back system is going to benefit this team. Because I think there was a number of times where you're looking at any one of these guys, whether it's Zorn, whether it's John, or at times even Waybe Mambo, and you're seeing, wow, look at the run that these guys are on. Like, you can clearly see somebody's got, you say the hot arm, but is it the hot legs that are here or whatever as they're running through? And then because of the system, they get swapped out and they put somebody else in. And in a 2-back system, that just means, okay, we're going to put one guy in, you're going to go for your thing, and then you're right back into it. But in a 3-back system, that means you could have somebody, and like one of these guys is tired and you need to break them off, but now they're potentially sitting off for like 2 or 3 drives and getting cold on the sidelines or just whatever else. And Joe Circelli, the offensive coordinator, does a fantastic job of really getting all of his guys involved here. But I think with a 2 running back system, that lends itself so that you can still make sure that you're not sacrificing quality regardless of Mambo or if Zorn is in. But now you gain a little bit more from that standpoint of, hey, we can keep with the guy who's really showcasing what he can do here. And we can have both of these players out on the field at the same time, Mambo or Zorn, either at fullback or tailback, and you can flip them. And we've already seen what happens with, you've got a Joey Zorn who's in at full. He leaks out into the flats. You get him the ball, get him into space, or Mambo doing something similar. And then after all of that, you go, oh my God, look at this 2-back system and how versatile they can be. And Mr. Versatile in Liam Talbot, if he can stay injury-free this entire year as well, there's a lot of pieces on this offense that maybe individually you say are really good, maybe not necessarily great, but I think in the system that's here and the way that they could be utilized can make this entire offense a very dangerous one going into this year.
Yeah, I think that's spot on. Again, I think it comes down to like the offense starts in that backfield one way or the other. You look at some of the guys that, and this roster is now giving me so many fits because it also does show Istvan Asibo-Dotsi on this too. And I'm like, go to the Argos roster. He is on that practice roster. I don't. So we're gonna get something wrong at some point here. We knew that was gonna happen. Tom shrugs. I'm in agreement there, but still seeing guys like Colby Ginn, Shane Johnson, Daniel Hector, receivers who've been in that system for a little bit. Again, you're not bare. You're not like the cupboard isn't bare there in terms of the receiving threats. Obviously, Javoni Cunningham, if that is true that he's not there, is again that's a huge loss as a return of what he can do. There's also you got to have hope that we look at what Liam Talbot's been able to do as this sort of gadget guy for him. Like he's got his younger twin brothers, who just went through their first year. Brendan, who's the receiver, and then Zach, who's the DB. And so, hey, it's not a wild thought to think that maybe Brendan can play a role in that offense the way that his brother has, and for Zach to have an impact on the defensive side of the ball. Again, I don't think it's too much of a stretch of the imagination, but it still comes down to that quarterback position. Defense, specifically on the defensive line, much in the same way we've talked about this offensive line, starting with, I feel like George Una was the first piece that we really saw, get scooped up by the CFL, and then Jackson Morgan. And there's at least one more guy whose name I'm forgetting, of just those just massive dudes that O-line has. I don't know if feel free to interrupt me. Owen Mueller. Yes. Oh, dude, Owen Mueller. But on the defensive line, they've been right there as stout as any other, and it started with the loss of moved the heck out of my way Agelli 2 years ago. They fill that gap admirably with guys like Malik George in the middle, and obviously when you have some like Khaladi Musan on the end, that's attracting enough attention that allows for then a guy like Liam Hoskins to have some nice play as well. When you look at this interior, even assuming that Ethan John and Robert Springer and some of these, really strong linebacker, secondary player guys are back in there, in the same way we talked about the Ottawa Gigi's defense, how much of a concern, where do you balance out a team where that linebacker and a secondary core you feel really strong about, but this is maybe the first year, it feels weird saying it after what we've seen in this decade of Windsor defense, but to say a bit concerned about their D-line play and really maybe even their O-line play. I have all the trust in the world in Randy Beardy, and just across the roster, those are big dudes that they get there. But sticking on the defensive side of the ball, it feels weird saying that I'm somewhat skeptical or like worried about that D-line, but I am a little bit. Defense in general and Patrick Donovan, no question at all. How do you feel about that defense, knowing that the types of run games that they have to deal with in the OUA?
Oh, I'm very, very nervous for this defense. There's so much that we don't know. And once again, you lose a guy like a Claudia Musin who is able to pressure quarterbacks in a certain way. If you don't have that consistently off the edge where it's a real threat, now you get into a similar scenario that we were talking about with the Ottawa Gigis, where a guy can sit back there comfortably unless you're sending a guy off the blitz. And even like, I know that they still have some solid guys, but I am nervous about that linebacking core as well. Losing a guy like Devin Verisuk, for sure, he is a stalwart, but a guy like Jason Rashotzi, who is your young buck who was coming up and who was really showcasing a lot of promise, who is not back this year as well. Like, there's a lot of question marks on this Windsor defense here. Now, if you get the secondary guys who are back, like if Robert Springer is back, Liam Hoskins is back, if you have those guys who are back, that's another huge aspect and a huge plus for your defense. But there's so many. I mean, once again, you start to look at what does this roster really mean? Are they just messing with people? Whatever. I only see Malik George as a D lineman who actually had a number on this roster here. At least in the big numbers, anyways, from the 90s up. He's the only guy who's listed here. So there's a lot of question marks. Who's going to be the guy here? Who are going to be the people who steps up? And like, Windsor were in these championship level games with all of these squads mainly because of their defense. Obviously the Griffin one sticking out because their offense came alive. They were able to put up 40 points. Final score is like 45-44. But for the majority of the time in the past two seasons here, the reason why they were in games, such close games, is because that defense kept them in consistently. Now, like, if you don't have that, at least for a fact, lock it in, Windsor defense going to be outstanding. There's so many question marks in there. I mean, even at last year or 2 years ago, they beat Queens in Windsor purely because of the defense. Devin Verisic with a pick six and what they were able to do to Anthony Leo at the time and Russell Weir. Like that defense is why they were in so many places here. And with so many unknowns, I am nervous for this Windsor squad.
I'm right there with you. Man, it'll be interesting to see how they end up sort of trying to plug those gaps. And I think if for no other reason now because I think you raised some valid concerns and there's still reason to be happy. I want to start to move towards the schedule because again, it's been a while since we did the deep dive and the way too early look at things. And I'm very curious to kind of see what we make of this as we take a look into this upcoming year. So for the Windsor Lancers, we're taking a look at their 2025 schedule. There we go. They are starting off. Come on. They're starting off on the road against the reigning champion Laurier Golden Hawks on August 30th. They are taking on Guelph at home on September 6th. They go to they're home against Mac on September 13th. They travel to U of T on September 20th, home against Waterloo on September 27th. They are home against Western on October 4th, travel to Ottawa on October 11th, and finish off on the road at Queens on October 18th. That to Ottawa, back to Windsor, to Queens sucks butt if you are Windsor. Oh my gosh. At the end of your season, and where's their bye fall in all of this? Holy, do they have the week one bye? Oh my, Windsor. Protest. Windsor, you have to protest this season. How the heck are you giving these guys a week one bye? Never. I'm staring at the levels to make sure I don't peek too hard. Never give an Ottawa or a Windsor team a week one bye or a week 9 bye. I know you have to try and make things fair and shake things up. Do not do that. That's so mean. That's so mean. And then to give them Ottawa and Queens back to back on the road, week 8 and week 9 is straight diabolical. Someone at the head offices doesn't like Windsor.
We talked about this previously, but I'm going to state it here again. This is between the quality of players that they're going up against, quality of teams going up against, and just purely the travel. This is the most difficult schedule in the OUA, bar none. The most difficult. You start off at Laurier, then Guelph, Mac, Toronto, Waterloo. If they play out how we think they are, that could be a nice little stretch. And then versus Western, travel to Ottawa, who could be really good, and travel to Queens, who we're thinking are going to be really good. Like, this is a tough as hell schedule. Going through this,
like I kind of feel like we have to. I feel like we need to go through this exercise together. I don't know. Like, do you have like your best case, worst case, like ready to go? What do we even say for our way too early predictions?
For the way too early predictions, I'd have to pull that back up if you just give me 1 second here. For the Windsor Lancers, in my best case scenario, we picked them at 4-4. And going through this, I think Laurier and Guelph right off the hop is tough. And I think those are two games you lose. Mac, Toronto, Waterloo, I see that as very winnable games for you here. And then stealing one between Ottawa and Queens, I think that's realistically where I see them. I see them as a 4-4. I think you could maybe make the case for a 5-3 with the back two with Ottawa and Queens. Like, they've played both teams really well, but with the schedule and how this is, I'm picking 4-4 as my best case. What are your thoughts on best case to start with?
Yeah, I think you have it right. Man, it's still it's a bit of a I'm going to say something that's slightly a bit of a cop out. I still just need to know who's on this defense. Cause like, with some of these guys, I mean, obviously we know Devin Verisic is not back and that's a huge blow. Just some of these guys in the secondary, I just think about like, we'll talk about Laurier in one of the next two podcasts to come and just like all the threats they have there at, a receiver. And it's just like, man, like what can you even possibly do to slow that down, especially if you're losing some of these guys we think they might. Guelph, exact same boat. I think you're right. It's 4-4, and maybe you're stretching to that 5-3 at the end of it. But I think just being realistic with the Ottawa Queens back-to-back, I just don't see that. Oh, the worst case scenario, though. Do you have something ready to go here? Like, what's your thought?
To me, I think worst case scenario here, that, and I listen, I'm the Mac alum, I'm everything else,
Where are you going
but
here?
I think it's 3-5.
Oh, yeah. Okay, good.
I think it is 3-5. I mean, even with like everything that we saw with Windsor and McMaster, even a couple of years ago at the start of this, Cercelli's, and we saw Keegan Hall and everything else that we saw with McMaster and things, and Windsor still gave him a game. I think it's still going to be 3-5 as worst case. I think you have a pretty solid September, but the start of August and start of September and then October is going to be brutal for these guys.
Yeah, no, I'm right there with you, and an interesting space for them to be in, where much in sort of the opposite manner that we looked at both of these Ottawa teams as having really high upside and really low downside. Windsor feel like you're smack dab in the middle, but not just with those questions defensively, but with the like, for all we know, Nick Domovsky comes out with, his freaking hair on fires, Goku Super Saiyan style. And it's like, oh, shoot, the prodigal son, the heir apparent to Windsor Essex region football is here to take the crown, from Austin Kennedy's long retired hands. Just waiting for like a guy to be there. Tom, this has been a lot of podcasting. A lot of OUA football. I am very satisfied with our job on there. Great job by you as always. Final thoughts on this C tier before we sign off and wish the people a good week until next time.
Yeah, hopefully everybody can see why we looped all four of these teams into one tier. I know it's a bit of a long podcast here, but I think all of these teams showcase and share a lot of things in common with where they could be, where they foresee them. For the most part, outside of Windsor, massive upside and massive downside potential here. And it's why I think this middle of the tier to the lower end is always one of my favorite spots, because there's so many what if scenarios that you can kind of play around with from that standpoint. But yeah, I think this is going to be, once again, showcasing why the OUA from top to bottom is the most competitive.
Yeah, no, 100%. You took the words out of my mouth. Tier C is literally the reason why the OUA is the best conference in all of OUA. That's going to do it for that one. That leaves 4 teams in Laurier, Western, Queens, and Guelph falling in some order in our final 2 tiers, in Tier B and Tier A. Where will they fall? What will they have to prove or not have to prove? You'll get our Tier B pod right here next week at the 55.